Fire moves faster uphill than most humans can run on flat ground, and every single rank on this ladder is built, in one way or another, around that one physical fact. Everything else this job asks of you, the training, the judgment, the years, exists to make sure that fact never gets to be the last thing you learn. 9 levels separate a seasonal hand crew recruit from the person a private client pays a fortune to stand between their house and a wall of flame nobody else is willing to face. And almost every level in between asks something of you that no paycheck at any point on the ladder fully accounts for. The pay at the bottom of this ladder is almost insulting. The pay at the top isn't. And the distance between those two facts is its own kind of story, one this world doesn't advertise nearly as loudly as it advertises the danger. Level 1, the seasonal firefighter. You're 19, hired for a single fire season on a hand crew, paid barely above minimum wage for work that regularly asks 14-hour days of you in heat and smoke that would send most people to a hospital. You spend your first weeks learning to dig fire line by hand, mile after mile of it, a physical grind that has nothing glamorous about it and everything to do with the unglamorous, exhausting reality that most wildfire work is manual labor, long before it's ever heroics. Nobody films the digging. Everybody films the flames. You learn within the first 2 weeks which of those two things the job is actually made of. A crew boss named Hale, weathered in a way that makes him look older than he probably is, runs your orientation personally. And the first thing he teaches isn't firefighting at all. It's how to read wind, terrain, and fuel together as a single system. Because he tells you, flatly, that the fires which kill people are almost never the ones burning where you can see them. They're the ones about to burn somewhere you haven't looked yet. He has the whole crew practice deploying emergency shelters in under 20 seconds, over and over, in full gear, in the heat, until the motion stops requiring conscious thought entirely. Because he tells you the 2 or 3 seconds lost to hesitation are exactly the 2 or 3 seconds that separate the firefighters in the incident reports from the ones who go home at the end of the season. You don't fully understand the weight of that sentence during your first season. You watch it become true secondhand in a report about a different crew's near miss the following year, and you understand it completely after that. Most of your first season is simply exhaustion, blisters that never quite heal before the next shift starts, a permanent low-grade cough from months of smoke exposure, a body that aches in ways you didn't know a 19-year-old's body could ache. You call your parents twice that whole summer, both times too tired to explain what the work actually feels like, settling instead for telling them you're fine and that the crew is good, both technically true and both leaving out almost everything that matters. You finish the season 9 pounds lighter and, in some way you can't fully articulate yet, a genuinely different person than you were in June. Level 2, the engine crew member. You move to an engine crew, working the interface between wildland and populated areas, defending structures directly in conditions considerably more chaotic than open hand crew work. Houses and driveways and panicked evacuating residents, adding a layer of unpredictability the open forest never had. Your pay creeps up modestly into the high 20s of thousands annually, still absurd relative to what you're actually risking on a bad night. You make your first real judgment call alone this season, a homeowner refusing to evacuate, a fire line moving faster than the official estimate predicted, a decision about how much time you actually have before the property becomes indefensible. You get the family out with minutes to spare. The house burns anyway. You spend a long time afterward turning over whether you'd made the right call fast enough, and Hale, reached by phone that same night, tells you the job was never about saving every structure. It was about making sure nobody died trying. The homeowner finds you 2 days later at a shelter set up for displaced residents and thanks you for the family's lives in a way that makes the lost house feel, for the first time, like the correct trade rather than a failure you'd been quietly carrying. You don't fully believe it in the moment. You believe it more, gradually, over the following seasons. Your second season on the engine crew brings a genuinely different kind of chaos. A neighborhood evacuation that turns disorganized, fast, residents driving the wrong direction in a panic, one elderly man refusing to leave a house you eventually have to physically help him out of with the fire visibly cresting a ridge less than a mile away. You get him out with time to spare this time, and the house survives too. And you understand, driving back to camp afterward, that the previous season's loss taught you something about urgency this one wouldn't have taught you on its own. You write a short note to the family of the house you lost the year before, the first time you've reached out since the fire, telling them simply that the man you saved this season is alive partly because of what their loss taught you. You don't know if the letter helps them. Sending it helps you in a way you hadn't expected it to. As you watch newer engine crew members struggle with the exact same math you struggled with that night, the impossible arithmetic of a job that measures success in lives rather than structures, in a culture that too often still measures it the other way around. Level 3. The Hotshot crew member. You earn a spot on an elite hand crew, the kind of unit that gets flown or driven to the most demanding fires in the country, selected through a physical and mental screening process that eliminates most applicants before the season even starts. Your pay reaches the low 40s, and the work intensifies into something closer to sustained combat than ordinary labor. 16-hour operational periods, weeks away from home, digging line on terrain steep enough that simply standing upright takes real effort before you've swung a single tool. You experience your first real entrapment scare this season. A wind shift nobody predicted. A fire suddenly moving toward your crew's position faster than your planned escape route can outpace it, and you deploy toward a designated safety zone at a dead run alongside the rest of your crew, gear discarded along the way per your training, adrenaline replacing thought entirely for several genuinely terrifying minutes. Everyone makes it, a fact you don't fully register as remarkable until weeks later, reading about a different crew's fatal entrapment on a fire 2 states away. The details eerily similar to your own near miss, right up until the point where the outcomes diverge completely. Hale, running the crew that season, doesn't discuss the incident dramatically afterward. He runs the same escape route briefing he runs every single morning, unchanged, because the briefing is the actual thing that got you out, not luck. You don't sleep well for the rest of that operational period, replaying the run to the safety zone in a loop you can't quite switch off. The specific sound of the crew's boots and breathing and gear rattling louder in memory than it probably was in reality. A veteran crew member, noticing, tells you flatly that the fear doesn't go away with experience. It just gets quieter and more useful. Less a thing that paralyzes you and more a thing that sharpens exactly how closely you watch the sky and the smoke from that day forward. Level 4. The Squad Boss. You lead a small team within the Hotshot crew now, responsible for a handful of firefighters' safety in addition to your own, translating the crew superintendent's broader strategy into moment-to-moment decisions on your specific piece of the fire line. Your pay crosses $50,000, and the responsibility reshapes how you experience every single shift. You're reading terrain and fire behavior now not just for yourself, but for 4 or 5 people whose safety depends on you seeing a problem before it becomes one. You call a retreat during a demanding operational period against a squad member's visible frustration based on a shift in smoke color and wind that most of your team hadn't yet consciously registered as significant. The fire behavior confirms your read within 20 minutes in a way that would have put your squad in serious danger had you waited. Nobody thanks you loudly for it. Hale tells you later that this is exactly what the job looks like at this level. Decisions that protect people who won't always realize in the moment what they were actually protected from. The squad member who was frustrated with you finds you that evening back at camp and apologizes without you having to ask for it, having watched the fire behavior confirm your call in real time from a position close enough to see it happen. You tell him not to worry about it, and mean it, because you remember being exactly that frustrated yourself as a Hotshot crew member 2 years earlier, certain a squad boss's caution was excessive right up until the moment it visibly wasn't. You spend the rest of that season noticing how differently you read smoke than you did as a rookie Hotshot. Color, density, the specific way it behaves in relation to wind you can barely feel at ground level. All of it now assembling itself into a single, instinctive read rather than a checklist you have to consciously run through. You try to teach the read explicitly to a newer squad member and find you can't fully articulate it in words, which unsettles you slightly, until Hale tells you, years later, that nobody ever really can. You just create enough situations for people to develop the same instinct themselves before it matters. Level 5. The Smokejumper. You cross-train into smoke jumping, the most specialized and mythologized role in Wildland Fire, parachuting directly into remote fire starts before they grow large enough to require a full ground crew. Working in genuine isolation, often the only firefighters on a fire for the critical first hours that determine how large it eventually becomes. Your pay climbs into the 60s, reflecting both the specialized training and the specific, singular danger of the job's most basic mechanic, jumping out of an aircraft into terrain nobody has scouted from the ground. Your first real jump onto an active fire goes technically well, and still leaves you shaking afterward in a way training never quite replicated. A hard landing in timber, gear scattered across rough terrain you now have to hike to recover before you can even begin actual firefighting work. You spend that night alone with 2 other jumpers, miles from the nearest road, containing a fire that would have grown dramatically by morning without your specific willingness to jump into terrain nobody else could reach in time. The isolation of the job becomes its own particular skill to develop. No crew of 20 around you for morale, no superintendent nearby to consult on a hard call, just 2 other jumpers and a radio connection to a dispatcher who's never actually seen the terrain you're describing, reading it back to you secondhand off a map that can't capture the specific way a canyon actually funnels wind once you're standing inside it. You learn to trust your own read on fire behavior in a way ground crew work never fully demanded, because at 3 in the morning on a remote ridge, there's frequently nobody else's judgment available to check yours against. You develop a close bond with the 2 jumpers you're paired with most often, a friendship built entirely out of shared isolation in some of the most remote terrain in the country. The 3 of you communicating in a kind of shorthand that takes newer jumpers a full season to fully pick up. One of them breaks an ankle on a hard landing during your 3rd year jumping together, a genuinely common injury in this line of work, and you spend 6 hours getting him to a location a helicopter can safely reach. Calm and methodical the entire way because panicking wouldn't get either of you out any faster. Level 6. The Hotshot Superintendent. You run an entire Hotshot crew now, 20 firefighters whose safety, training, and deployment decisions rest with you across an entire season. Your pay crosses $85,000, and the job becomes, in a way, none of the levels below it fully prepared you for, as much about people as about fire. Reading which crew members are running on empty before they'll admit it themselves, managing a season's accumulated exhaustion before it becomes the kind of mistake this trade doesn't forgive easily. You lose a firefighter from a crew working an adjacent section of the same fire during your 2nd season as superintendent, a loss that ripples through the entire fire camp in a way that changes the mood of every subsequent briefing for weeks. You're the one who has to call the firefighter's family, a duty nobody higher up the chain takes off your hands, even though you'd gladly have handed it to anyone willing. Because the crew understands, without anyone saying so directly, that the news needs to come from someone who actually knew him, rather than from an official who didn't. You call Hale, retired by now, but still the person you call, and he tells you there's no version of this job at any level where that call gets easier to make or easier to receive. You believe him. You keep leading crews into fire seasons anyway, the way he apparently did for decades before you. You start writing names down after that season, quietly, in a small notebook you don't show anyone. Not just the firefighter you lost, but a running record of every close call your own crew survives, a habit that costs you a little sleep each time you add to it and somehow still feels better than not keeping it at all. You show it to a rookie superintendent, years later, mentoring him the way Hale once mentored you, and tell him it isn't morbid. It's the only ledger in this job that actually tells you the truth about the cost. Level 7. The Incident Commander. You oversee entire fire responses now, coordinating multiple crews, aircraft, and agencies across incidents that can involve thousands of personnel and stretch for weeks. Your decisions determining evacuation zones, resource allocation, and the overall strategy for fires large enough to threaten entire communities. Your compensation, between base pay and incident-specific assignments, crosses 6 figures for the first time in your career. Still a strange number to reconcile against work that started with minimum wage and a hand tool. The scale of the job at this level takes real adjustment. A single briefing now covers dozens of crews and agencies you'll never personally meet. Resource requests move through layers of bureaucracy that feel painfully slow when you remember how fast fire itself moves. And the decisions you make ripple out to communities whose names you learn from evacuation maps rather than from ever having walked their streets. You miss the immediacy of crew-level work more than you expected to. The direct physical clarity of digging line with your own hands instead of directing dozens of crews doing it on your behalf. You make a call during a major incident to pull all ground crews back from a section of line as fire behavior deteriorates faster than any model predicted, a decision that costs contained acreage and draws real criticism from stakeholders eager to see more aggressive action. The fire does exactly what you feared it would within the hour, in a way that would have been catastrophic for any crew still on that line. You don't feel vindicated. You feel, mostly, the specific exhaustion of having been right about something that could have killed people if you hadn't been. The criticism doesn't fully quiet down even after the fire proves your call correct, because acreage lost is visible and countable in a way lives saved never quite are, and you learn, at this level, to make peace with decisions that will occasionally look wrong to people counting the wrong numbers. You brief the stakeholders personally the following week, walking them through the fire behavior data in detail neither of you enjoys, because you've decided the job now includes teaching people what the numbers actually mean, not just being right in front of them. Level 8. The Private Defense Specialist. You leave public agency work after 2 decades for the private sector, joining an elite firm hired directly by wealthy homeowners and insurance companies to defend individual high-value properties in fire-prone areas, work that exists almost entirely outside public awareness, funded by people willing to pay extraordinary sums for defense resources public agencies simply can't dedicate to a single house. Your compensation crosses $200,000, funded by clients whose names occasionally appear in the news for reasons that have nothing to do with wildfire at all. The work unsettles you in ways the public sector never did, arriving at a mansion with a full private crew and equipment, while a public engine crew nearby fights to defend an entire working-class neighborhood with a fraction of the resources. The specific, uncomfortable inequality of the arrangement never quite fading, no matter how many seasons you spend inside it. You mentioned this once, carefully, to a client during a slow evening on watch, and she surprises you by agreeing entirely, telling you she'd asked her insurer the same question the first year she hired a private crew and never received an answer that didn't sound rehearsed. Neither of you resolves anything in that conversation. You think about it more than almost any other conversation from that entire chapter of your career. Hale, consulted occasionally by your firm, tells you the discomfort is appropriate and shouldn't go away, that the day it stops bothering you is the day you should probably find a different job. You negotiate, within your first year at the firm, to spend a portion of every season back on public incidents as a volunteer resource, unpaid, purely to keep some version of the job that first drew you in at 19 still active in your life, alongside the version that now pays you extraordinarily well. Your firm's leadership is puzzled by the arrangement and permits it anyway, mostly because your private clients never actually complain about a specialist who's clearly still sharp, precisely because he never stopped doing the harder, less lucrative work on the side. Level 9. The Legend. There are a small number of names in Wildland Fire that younger firefighters learn before they've ever swung a tool themselves. People whose careers spanned hand crews, hotshot leadership, and incident command, who get called in as consultants when a fire behaves in ways nobody currently on an incident has ever personally witnessed before. You are, after 3 decades, one of them. A fact that still surprises you slightly on the calls when a fire behavior analyst reads back a report and mentions, almost offhand, that they cross-referenced it against something you published years earlier without you ever having met them. Hale passed away last year, and you spoke at a memorial filled with firefighters spanning every era of a career that trained more crew bosses and superintendents than anyone could accurately count. You told the story about wind and terrain and fuel from your very first orientation, the one about the fires that kill people never being the ones you can already see, because it was the sentence that had shaped every single decision you made for the rest of your career, on ground and in the air alike. A row of firefighters near the back, none older than 20, took notes on their phones during your eulogy, the way you once would have taken notes with a pencil and a battered notebook. And you understood, watching them, exactly how a single sentence from a good crew boss keeps working its way down a ladder long after the person who first said it is gone. You've lost more colleagues across 3 decades than you can discuss comfortably, and the specific unfairness of a job that pays so little at the bottom for a danger so total has never stopped sitting uneasily with you, even now, even after everything the top of this ladder eventually paid you. The question this world never quite lets you answer is the one that matters most. Whether the people still fighting fires on minimum wage at the bottom of this exact ladder right now know something true that the money at the top eventually let you forget, or whether you simply earned, the hard way, the right to stop pretending the unfairness was ever going to resolve itself. You still volunteer on public incidents every season you're physically able to, unpaid, standing next to 19-year-olds earning barely more than you did at their age. And you've stopped trying to resolve the contradiction of a career that pays a fortune at the very top for defending a single mansion, while paying almost nothing at the bottom for defending entire towns. You just keep showing up to both. 9 levels, from a hand tool and minimum wage to the person wealthy clients call when a wall of fire is the only thing standing between them and everything they own. If worlds like this pull you in, there's another one waiting next week. Subscribe, and I'll see you there.